If you're watching this channel, it's because you don't enjoy watching the world squander what Christendom built, but you want to do your part. And chances are you've heard me mention a great means by doing just that. Email made by and for Catholics. Check out fidei.email. That's FIDEI.email. Built for Catholic individuals, families, organizations, and groups. They're private, secure, and of course, they're Catholic. And they're offering 2 months off on your first year for an annual subscription if you enter the coupon code Return to Tradition without spaces. That's the name of this channel, without spaces, at checkout.
Francis is fully engaged in a public campaign. What is he campaigning for? He's campaigning to stop the people, to silence the people telling him to resign from his alleged hold on the papacy. And he is also campaigning for his successor. That's what all appearances are showing. He's doing this for a number of reasons. He has the perception that he is weak, that he's infirm, that he cannot do his job as Pope. And so he is campaigning to get rid of that perception. It's a well-established fact that he has not offered a Mass publicly in a very, very long time. He certainly attends them. He did so during Holy Week, and he certainly did so during Easter and the Holy Triduum. In fact, he even gives the impression that he's celebrating those Masses, but when you pay close attention, he's not even doing that much. Publicly, he hasn't offered the Mass in quite some time. And some people have been scandalized by this, but it's worth remembering that priests, once they reach a certain amount of inability to move and become a level of infirm, they no longer are required to offer the Mass. That hasn't stopped previous pontiffs, but the priests are, once they hit a certain disability, exempt from offering the Holy Mass every day, canonically. Now, despite that, though, the example of John Paul II does loom large over this. Famously, John Paul II would offer the Mass when he was unable to walk. He would still, with assistance, get down on his knees during the consecration. He would have people help him through the whole thing, up to pretty much the end. Francis is choosing to take a different route, and that's his business. But it does create a perception, and the perception is that he's not long for the papacy. You're seeing all these weird articles coming out now saying that we are in the waning days of the Francis papacy, that we're in the sunset of the papacy, that this is almost over and the church needs to start looking towards the next pope. And I'm sure Francis is a better idea of us than how much longer he has, but I do caution people to also remember that people said the same thing about John Paul II for a very long time before he went to his personal judgment. But we see other evidence, too, that he is campaigning for not only himself, but also for his replacement. And we saw that in some of the strange statements he made involving Benedict XVI. He claimed, for instance, that in 2005, people tried to use him as a means of stopping Benedict XVI. He had nothing to do with that. That contradicts everything we've ever heard from those in the know, that Bergoglio was the second highest vote getter at that conclave, and that he very nearly became Pope in 2005, and that he was actively campaigning at the conclave against Benedict. That's what we've heard independently from several sources. Francis himself broke his vows of silence regarding the inner workings of the conclave, would vow everybody who participates in one takes, to dispel that notion. In fact, going so far as to say that Benedict was his candidate. I don't believe him at all on those statements, but it is part of a larger program. He is campaigning for both his own legitimacy moving forward at a time when for the last 30 or 40 years, we have had people say that popes reach a certain level of inability to continue the job of being inactive. They should stop being pope. They should resign and allow a conclave to replace, find a new pope. Well, it's a very modern idea, not one I'm actually fond of. I just think that popes should stop being globetrotters. They should stop traveling everywhere and going to all these places. There's no reason to do it. No real reason, I don't think. But Francis is even not going to do that. He's going to continue traveling. He's going to continue going to the peripheries. We get all that is important here in this context of the story we're going to talk about today. So headline from Monday Vatican, Pope Francis and his outgoing church. And no, this is not a story about how we're allegedly in the waning days of the Francis reign over the church. Francis has spoken at length about the outgoing church, a church that needs to go out to the peripheries. It needs to go to where the people are. It's the logical extension of a lot of the permanent aggiornamento talk from Vatican II and a lot of the talk of the being a church of the poor and all this other stuff we got out of Vatican II. It's a logical extension of that. And here we get really what he's doing. So, from the article, quote, "In the last week, Pope Francis has shown his renewed vigor in every way. After not having delivered the sermon on the Palm Sunday Mass, but he was probably just tired at that moment because he instead read the entire Angelus catechesis the same day, the Pope showed up on Holy Thursday without a cane and a chair. He was on wheels at the general audience on Wednesday, personally reading the text he had been giving others to read in recent weeks. On Holy Thursday, he read the entire homily of the Chrism Mass. Then there was the Mass in the women's prison, among the very few in the 11 years of the pontificate to be broadcast entirely live. If one wants to be cynical, one should think that the Pope is doing everything to ward off any possible suspicion of a debilitating or, in any case, persistent illness. He's not a Pope who lets go, that's for sure. And this is also demonstrated by the fact that he is thinking of a long trip to Asia for the beginning of September, about 10 days, touching Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, East Timor, Singapore, and maybe even Vietnam. However, Pope Francis is not only demonstrating to his detractors that he wants to remain in the saddle until the end, that his health is better than one would like to believe. Pope Francis is carrying out a political act that aligns with his entire pontificate." End quote. That political act is, of course, trying to firmly reestablish the church's center in the Southern Hemisphere. You hear a lot of talk about the church of the peripheries, all that stuff. We keep saying it, but he keeps talking about the church, the future of the church being in those places. You get a lot of social scientists who tend to agree with that because Catholicism in South America is actively being replaced by evangelical Protestantism. Catholicism in Africa is being replaced by evangelical Protestantism. That's something people don't want to talk about, but it's happening. It's happening in a very real way in Africa. The U.S., North America, and Western Europe are walking away from faith entirely. But the faith seems to be thriving in the peripheries, as Francis calls them. That's part of it. But there's another aspect to this, as I said before. It's 2024. There's a big contest coming up in November that in the United States that has already gotten underway. Canada and the UK are having similar contests this year, and it looks like the established parties are going to get kicked to the curb. At least that's what it looks like, 6 or 7 months ahead of time. Francis is doing the same thing here. He's campaigning for the next conclave. Why? Well, of course, he's trying to ward off all those who say that he needs to step down. His own side is saying that. The modernists have been hinting at it publicly. I've gone over many of those articles here for you in the last few months. But the second thing he's doing is he's reminding everyone of his new orientation for the church, that the peripheries, as he calls them, cannot be ignored. If I was Cardinal Tagle, I would be trying to get on board with his tour that he's planning for Southeast Asia. I would try to go with him to everywhere there and not just when he comes to Indonesia. I would be there for the whole thing. But back to this article, quote, "Francis is saying in thoughts, words, and deeds, but without omissions, that the church he refers to is the church of the people, not that of the curia or the institutions. When he talks about the outgoing church, he says precisely that. And when he says that the cardinals requested his government program, he refers to the fact that his speech on the outgoing church, then released in a not entirely ritual manner, but permitted by the Pope himself, had been much applauded and appreciated. Pope Francis's reasoning is linear. If the cardinals appreciated that speech, they could not fail to appreciate how he works to arrive at that idea of an outgoing church. It is the first time we find ourselves in front of such a South American and Jesuit Pope. Many of his codes are yet to be deciphered and understood, and they mean differently from what is commonly thought when analyzing the church. Pope Francis comes from the global South and speaks to the global South. He comes from a hemisphere that feels exploited and vilified by the Western world. A Western world, among other things, which fuels wars for its profit and cannot make peace." End quote. Again, perfectly summarizing Francis's view of things. Francis doesn't want you to forget about this South that he keeps invoking. Again, if I was Cardinal Tagle, I'd go on board with all this as much as I possibly could because there are observers pointing out that Tagle, who had been the heir apparent for a long time and then suddenly fell from grace, appears to be rebounding. Could be the heir apparent again. He's one of several of these cardinals that in recent weeks and months has had their cachet go up among the College of Cardinals. Francis is clearly working for two things here. Again, trying to cement his own legacy while also keeping the job he has as long as possible, because, again, we're pretty sure Benedict was pressured to resign, which begs the question if it was valid at all. But the second thing is that he's trying to push off that same pressure we've seen publicly, usually done in like hinting, subtle ways, but one that you cannot miss the message of if you're the target of, or if you're a savvy observer. Of course, the second thing he's doing is trying to guarantee we get another pope from the peripheries. Why? Because a pope from the peripheries is much more likely to continue what Francis is doing to the church. I'm curious what you think about this. So, do you agree that that's what he's doing? That he's trying to create the image of being vibrant and vigorous and all the rest of the stuff that might quell that demand that he step down? Do you agree with my general assessment that we should maybe hold off on the expecting Francis to go to his judgment any day now, and that he may be here for a lot longer than anybody expects? That's been my constant warning to people. And do you agree that he's also at the same time trying to remind the College of Cardinals, because they're the ones who make these decisions, that not to forget the global South, that the South is where the next pope should come from, that it's his way of campaigning for a Francis II? I'm curious what you have to say about all that, so let me know in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. If you've ever thought about becoming a patron of Return to Tradition, now's a great time to do so. Helps keep these daily messages coming. And for those of you who've asked about where the that Give, Send, Go campaign is that a viewer started to, after the news I gave you a couple of weeks ago from a personal front, it should be in the pinned comment below. So always pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.